We're going to talk to Chris Daw, barrister, writer and broadcaster right now, but just before we do that, have a look at Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, talking about the importance of anonymity for the police.
When officers act in the most dangerous situations on behalf of the state, it is vital that those officers and their families are not put in further danger during any subsequent legal proceedings. So we will therefore introduce a presumption of anonymity for firearms officers subject to criminal trial following a police shooting in the course of their professional duties up to the point of conviction. We will also ensure that the highly specialist nature of particular policing tactics and tools are reflected in relevant investigative guidance.
I think this is a very important intervention by the Home Secretary, and I think for once I can actually say that I'm in agreement with Yvette Cooper. I think she's done something that she should have done, and I think it's the right thing to do. Let's see if Chris Daw agrees. Chris, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Go on, sorry.
Well, I was going to answer your question that I thought was coming, was do you agree with Yvette Cooper about this? And the answer is I agree with her to a degree, but I don't think she goes anywhere near far enough, because anonymity is not enough to protect these officers from the concern that they might be exposed to legal process. It's prosecution that's the main problem. Anonymity is only a side issue in the grand scheme of things. And I think it's important, if you don't mind me giving me a minute or so, just so your listeners are all aware of what happened. And I'll read a very brief summary of the incident as it happened, as it unfolded on the day. Kaba, the deceased, was driving an Audi Q8 that officers believe was linked to a firearms incident the previous day. The police stopped the car. Armed police approached on foot. Kaba then rammed an unmarked police car, as I think we may be able to see here. An armed officer fired a single round at Kaba through the car windscreen, and Kaba was taken to hospital and died of his injuries. So there are the circumstances. You have armed police who honestly and reasonably believe that they are dealing with an armed incident, an armed person in that vehicle who represents an immediate danger of life to them and to any bystander. In those circumstances, about 13 seconds after initially approaching the vehicle, Kaba was shot. And he was shot whilst actively attacking the police using a moving motor vehicle and a high-performance motor vehicle. One of the most dangerous weapons on our streets are motor vehicles. They can cause death in an instant, as we all readily understand. So that's what the officers, and including Martyn Blake, were facing when they approached that vehicle. An honest belief there's a gun involved, or there may be a gun in the car, and someone is actively ramming police cars with a vehicle.
And repeatedly as well. Sorry, just repeatedly ramming. I mean, I didn't, until I saw that footage yesterday. I remember the arrest being made in 2022. Sorry, the incident in 2022. And at no time was it described in the way that it actually looked. You know, the suggestion was the police stopped a man, and as a result of a situation, he ended up getting shot, which obviously made it look as though the police had done something wrong. But when you see this guy, he's not just ramming a police vehicle. He's going backwards and forwards. He's hitting a car behind him. He's hitting one in front of him. He's trying to escape as well.
Yeah, I mean, the trying to escape wouldn't justify shooting him dead. We don't have a law that permits officers to shoot people purely to stop them escaping. There has to be an immediate perception of a risk to life before a firearms officer opens fire. But the point I was going to make was that immediate decision to open fire in that split-second period is the most critical period of duty for any firearms officer. Firearms officers go on duty every single day. Most days, they are not deployed to incidents where they believe firearms are going to be used against them. Most days, they don't face violent criminals trying to ram them and cause injury or damage to police officers using a high-performance vehicle. Most days, those things don't happen. But when they do happen, on the days they happen, that's when the public needs those officers to be free to make decisions in the split-second moment which they honestly believe are necessary to protect the public and to protect themselves and their colleagues. This officer, on any reasonable assessment of this evidence, fired a single shot in circumstances where the officers were clearly in danger. And in my view, this case should never, ever have been anywhere near a criminal prosecution. That's the real problem here. Anonymity is all very well, but that's not going to solve very much in the long term. What's going to solve the problem problem that we've created here, which is armed officers handing in their tickets for firearms and refusing to go on firearms duty because they are afraid of spending 20 years in prison in the conditions that police officers spend their time when they go to prison. And that's not even the conditions of an ordinary prisoner.
Right.
Police officers are high-risk prisoners. They're placed with sex offenders on Rule 43. And the idea that any police officer with a firearm is going to open fire where there's a realistic prospect that he's going to go to prison for 20 years for murder in those conditions is frankly ridiculous. These prosecutions need to stop unless an officer acts way beyond the bounds of his training and of good police practice. That officer should never face prosecution, in my view.
Right. Well, certainly the Metropolitan Police have reacted to this, because the Times ran a story yesterday saying that the Metropolitan Police were going to be pushing for the inability to actually prosecute police officers in these instances, and they wanted to clarify, and this is what they said. We ask that in circumstances where officers are deployed in the execution of their duty and in line with their training, whether that is in firearms incidents or other areas like pursuits, then they make split-second decisions under huge pressure and often with partial information to protect the public or themselves. This should be taken into account to a much greater degree. So I think they're agreeing with you there. But surely the point about the anonymity, Chris, is about protection as well for the individual, even if whether there is a prosecution or not, because the problem that now faces Martyn Blake, the police officer in question, is he's got a £10,000 bounty on his head because, you know, the horrible 6-7 gang from Brixton want to kill him in revenge for what he did.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with anonymity. I'm just saying that in a case like this, in a case where there is clearly not multiple shots fired at someone who poses no danger to the police, or perhaps is retreating or going away, where you can't really justify shooting on the basis of necessity or self-defense or defense of officers. In those circumstances, there should be a presumption against prosecution. And what the law should say is that before any prosecution can even begin, the CPS must be satisfied that they can prove that the officer acted wholly outside of his training and experience and the standards of firearms policing. Because if he acted within his training and within standard procedures, and where there is an obvious risk at the time of opening fire, no officer in those circumstances should be frightened they're going to be prosecuted. And absolutely, I agree with you. Any officer in these circumstances should be given anonymity until the point of any conviction. And one of the major reasons for that is not just to protect them in the way that you've described, but going back to that split-second decision. An officer's not only worrying, I'm going to be done for murder and spending years in prison, but my whole life, my name, everything's going to be exposed in that process, even if I'm found not guilty in the end. Those sorts of risks should not be playing on the mind of the very officers that we deploy and we trust to protect us when people with guns or who may have guns pose a danger on our streets. We need those officers to be free to act within their training to protect themselves, their colleagues, and all of us. And that has not happened as a result of this case. This case has made the public less safe than they were before Martyn Blake was prosecuted.
I couldn't agree with you more. Chris, great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Chris Dill, barrister, writer and broadcaster there.